Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sake Revolution. This is America's first sake podcast, and I'm your host, John Puma from the Sake Notes, also administrator over at the Internet Sake Discord, the guy who runs the r/sake community over at Reddit. But if you're looking for the Sake Samurai, that's the other guy.
And I'm your host, Timothy Sullivan. I'm a Sake Samurai, sake educator, as well as the founder of the Urban Sake website. And every week, John and I will be here tasting and chatting about all things sake and doing our best to make it fun and easy to understand.
Tim, how have you been?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really, really good. We went down to the farmer's market last weekend, and I went apple crazy. I got like 6 apples. They had the biggest Honey Crisps I've ever seen in my life. And I really like Honey Crisp apples. But they had a type of apple called Mutsu, which apparently is actually originally from Aomori. But these are grown in New York.
Sounds Japanese, Mutsu.
Yeah, no, it is that strain of apple. And it's a big green apple that it's not like, I think Crispin is what they might call them domestically.
Yeah.
But it originally comes from Japan and very, very delicious, nice and juicy. They're not, they're green, but they're not like Granny Smith's. They're more like Golden Delicious.
Yeah.
But really, really good stuff. I can be a little bit of an apple nerd sometimes.
Not an ice nerd. Not an ice nerd.
Not an ice nerd. No, we leave that to you.
Well, this is quite a coincidence because I bought something at the store with a giant apple on it.
Really?
Yes. And it happens to be, I don't know if you've ever seen a bottle of sake with a giant ruby red apple hang tag hanging off of it. Have you ever seen that?
I might have, and use the word coincidence, did you?
I do. Coinky dink, as we say.
Coinky dink. I have a feeling that maybe this might be the tail wagging the dog here.
So John and I found this sake we just had to get.
Yes.
It is a ripe apple Junmai Ginjo, and it has a giant hang tag hanging off the neck in the shape of a red apple. To see a picture, visit sakerevolution.com show notes, as always. But John, when we saw this bottle, we just couldn't resist it, right?
We could not resist at all. You get me with the gimmicks like that every time. But in this case, it was actually from a brand that you and I are familiar with here in New York. A lot of their stuff gets imported here, called Kinoene. And yeah, we saw they had this new product and that it was ripe apple related. We felt like we needed to get it for the show and talk about it.
Yes. So the brewery name is Iinuma Honke, and they're from Chiba Prefecture, and they have a history of over 300 years. So this brewery's been around a long time, and Chiba is just north of Tokyo, probably most famous for having Narita Airport, right?
Yes, I think that a lot of people refer to Chiba somewhat dismissively as the New Jersey.
Oh,
yes.
No,
so
New Jersey's wonderful.
If Tokyo is New York, then Chiba is sort of the New Jersey, the suburbs.
Suburbs.
Yes, the place where people live sometimes, and they'll use the airport over there, that kind of thing.
Well, this brewery has a long, long history, and we've known their brand Kinoene for a long time.
Yeah.
And, when I talk about this brand, the one thing that has always stood out to me is that they make really good sake, but I think they aim to make really affordable, approachable premium sake.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of their hallmarks. All their stuff is very approachable, very light, sippable, quaffable, we like to say on the show sometimes. You specifically like to say that. And I think that's, nice, easy drinking sake. There's a place for that, especially in my heart.
Yeah, and not just the style, John, but also the price. Like they charge $23 to $25 for a standard bottle that's the entry for premium sake. Like you can't get things cheaper than that for a 720. And the fact that it's such good quality, so easy drinking, and right at the super approachable price point, that's a win-win in my book.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan, and that's a big part of the reason. Great sake, low price. Sign me up. So yeah, when we saw this new product, we had to get in the door and see what it was all about. So Tim, what is it all about?
All I can do is read you what the label says, John. It says, Kinoene apple possesses an elegant fragrance and is well balanced between sweetness and acidity. So I think we can expect a little sweetness, and I think we can expect some acidity as well.
All right. Did they just think it tastes like apples? Did they squeeze some apple juice into it? What's the apple connection?
No apple juice is in there.
Thankfully, because then it wouldn't be sake.
That's right, John. As you know, we've done some episodes in the past that focus on yeast. And the yeast used in this particular sake is really unique and special. It's called Kyokai 77. Now, when you hear this word Kyokai in front of a yeast number, that stands for association. And that would be the Brewers Association that maintains a line of yeast that the brewers can buy and then use to ferment their sake. These association yeasts are numbered in Japan. So, for example, there's like a yeast number 7, there's a yeast number 9, there's a yeast number 1801. And in this case, it's yeast 77. Now, this particular yeast is known for a few things, but of specific interest to us is that about 65% of the acid produced by this particular yeast is a type of acid known as malic acid. And it's unique because that is not common in sake at all. Sake is much more likely to have a type of acid known as lactic acid. And that lactic acid gives those dairy, butter, and cream flavors and aroma that are common in some sakes. But malic acid is much more common in white wine, and it lends a brightness and acidity to wine. And I'm curious if we're going to find that here in this sake as well. Now, I found a fun fact when I was looking up malic acid. Malic acid actually gets its name from the Latin word malum, which means apple, right? So I think we're beginning to see the connection here. Kinoene wanted to tap into the bright acidity of apples, and I think they found their way to that through this special yeast number 77, which really kind of overflows with malic acid.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's especially interesting. Yeah. It sounds like a lot of fun. All right.
And
so
what do you think about the presentation of the bottle here with this giant hang tag?
The hang tag is very cute.
It's very cute.
Nice. It's very cute. I do like the label in general. It's got like a parchment paper color to the background. It's not white necessarily, but it is that off-white. The font is a very kind of modern take on like kanji. So everything it's very stylized in a way that is like kind of like technological looking, but also kind of Egyptian almost. Looks like hieroglyphics in a way, especially since they made it gold. They made the lettering gold. And, you guys need to kind of take a pause real fast and look at the show notes so you can see what we're talking about here. It's very important. It's hard to do a visual when we're chatting.
And one word is highlighted on the label in red. It says Kinoene apple and then ripe.
Ripe.
Ripe apple.
Yeah. Now, since they're just using the yeast, you cannot speak for the ripeness.
I think I'm going to guess here that the impression of the flavor is very juicy, ripe apple. That's kind of what they're going for.
I think that's what they're probably going for too.
We've solved the mystery.
We did. Sometimes we got to be a little funny though.
All right. Well, I do have a quote from the brewery about the use of this apple hang tag. Again, it's very distinctive. And they said that the using apple in the product name and as a bottleneck ornament, they are hoping that it will leave an impression that adds a pop of color, and it certainly does, by utilizing the sharp form of typography for the label. They hope to introduce a different perspective from traditional sake labels. So they're going for something totally different, and it certainly caught our eye, didn't it?
Yeah, for certain. I do like the font choices on the label. I thought they were pretty interesting and cool. But honestly, that's not what caught my eye. It's the hang tag.
Yep.
The hang tag caught my eye.
The ripe apple.
The ripe apple caught my eye because you really can't miss that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so John, do you want to give us the stats for this sake? We talked about the yeast already, but what else is going on with this sake?
Well, so as you mentioned, this is the Kinoene ripe apple Junmai Ginjo. This is from Iinuma Honke over in Chiba Prefecture. Don't let them call it New Jersey. We have 2 rices in play here, the Yamana Nishiki and the Gohyakuman Goku. Both of them have been milled down to 55% of their original size. The yeast, as you mentioned, is that Kyokai number 77. The sake meter value, here's what things get interesting, Tim. That measure of dry to sweet is a staggering minus 17. Whew. This could have been on an extreme series. But I do think it is going to be offset a little bit because the next stat is acidity, which is at 3.
Wow, 3.
So a 3 acidity with a sake meter value of negative 17 is going to be interesting.
Yep.
And of course, alcohol by volume is 15%.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, John, I can't wait any longer.
Great. Let's
This ripe apple is calling my name, so let's get this in the glass.
Let's get this in the glass.
So in the glass, this has just a hint of yellowish color, but pretty clear. Let's give this super ripe apple a smell.
Let's.
Smells good.
It does.
Smells like ripe fruit.
Yeah, this is right up my alley. That's really nice. And it's not the melon balm. It's not the tropical fruit. It's fruity. It's a different fruit.
You think about pear and apple, those seeded fruits have a little bit.
And maybe the power of suggestion with the apple. I'm not sure. But
Definitely. I mean, there's a giant apple hang tag that's hypnotizing me.
it's just swaying it back and forth in front of me.
I mean, if I were to assess this without the apple hang tag, I might get a hint of pineapple as well. Like for me, there's fruitiness going on. Maybe
Pineapple.
papaya. I think especially of pineapple skin. Like when you pick up a unpeeled pineapple and you smell it, you get that pineapple skin aroma. I get a little bit of that. It does smell appley, a little bit of pear, but it's in the fruit zone, not the friend zone, but the fruit zone.
Yeah. And it is a lovely aroma. I mean, it's something I keep going back to and I'm like, oh, I'm going to enjoy this some more. I'm going to bring some more into my sinuses. All right, Tim, are you ready to sip?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Ooh.
Holy high acid, Batman. That is high acidity.
I believe you mentioned that a little acidity goes a long way with sake, and this is a 3, which is a lot. So, and it is kind of, it is offsetting that minus 17. I think this does not come across as being alarmingly sweet.
Well, I have 2 things to say. One is that reminding our listeners that acidity normally plays in the range of 1.0 to 2.0, and this is up at 3.0. So this acidity is really high for sake in general. And the other thing is about the minus 17. Remember when we talk about this SMV, we're talking about the density of the sake versus water. And even though we may not pick up on super overt sweetness, think about the density of the sake on your palate. It's got a coating quality to it, and it's got a richness, right?
Mm-hmm. When you move this around in the glass, the legs on the glass are intense. Like it is leaving a lot behind when you swirl it.
So it's got a very coating mouthfeel to it, all the while having a very high acid profile. It can kind of pucker your cheeks a little bit with the acidity. And I think when you talk about new wave wine-like sakes, this is really what's in that zone.
It is. It seems like that's what they're going for with this new product. It is also, I want to say that the intensity of it, this high acidity, there's a burst to it, also reminds me a lot of unpasteurized sake, even though this is pasteurized.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an interesting little trick.
It's that promise of ripeness that they made on the label.
Mm-hmm.
It really does taste ripe and juicy without being unpasteurized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I've experienced a sake that tasted this unpasteurized while being, as far as I can tell, double pasteurized.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Now being, even though this is a pretty intense sake, I think this is something very sippable too. I'm enjoying just drinking it. Yeah. I am a touch at a loss though about what I would pair this with. What are you thinking?
Well, John, there's one thing that popped to mind. I don't know if I'm just craving this or if it's something that I think would pair well. No, it'll pair well. But if you have I know the cheese is not your thing, but cheese and crackers, if you had an apple chutney over cheese and crackers, that's so yummy. So a mild buttery cheese with a cracker for texture. And then normally one thing I'd like to do with that situation is drizzle honey on that or put an apple chutney or a pear chutney. And sipping this sake instead of a chutney or a honey would be an amazing combination. So the saltiness and the creaminess of cheese along with this would go really well.
I could see that. I mean, apart from the cheese part. No. When you said crackers, I was immediately like, yeah. So you mentioned that this has a thick, it is a thick sake. It has a coating effect on the mouth, which means it does kind of build on itself. When you're having a sip of it and then you have another sip of it, it's not just what you had before. It's a little more intense. And I think that having some crackers to kind of break that up and just kind of neutralize me a little bit, kind of it's like the reverse of when we have a rich food and a dry sake, and the dry sake helps you to reset. It's I want the crackers to help me reset from the sake because the sake is so big.
Yeah. That is one of the dangers of namas or super rich, sweeter sakes is that they can become a little bit intense. People often say, I can only have one glass of that. If something that borders on a dessert sake or something that has that richness, it's hard to drink several glasses because it's not a refreshing style. It's more of a juicy style.
And this is something that I'm enjoying sipping on it right now, but I can't do this bottle. This bottle's under no threat for disappearing tonight. It's really tasty, but it's a lot. And you do need, I need to step back. It does have that, as you pointed out, that almost nama effect where your palate gets a little tired. It's just, it's so big.
Yeah. But I think the flavor profile is up your alley.
Yeah, certainly. It definitely is up my alley. Yeah. And again, I'm just really surprised they're able to capture so much of that nama identity in something that is most definitely not a nama. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah. And the fact that they've brought out really distinct apple flavor with no apple in there at all. It's the magic of fermentation. I don't think consumers, we could definitely forgive them for thinking that they have infused apple flavor in here, right?
It's the flavor they're kind of chasing after when they choose that yeast. It's really interesting. The thing about this sake is that they're using that yeast. They got a big apple on the front here.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody at home necessarily caught all of our episodes, and maybe we need a little bit of a refresher on what exactly yeast brings to the party here.
Yeah. Yeast is so important. Yeast, of course, is a microorganism. And if you know anything about fermentation, you know the role that yeast plays is so consequential. Yeast is actually a fungus. Did you know that yeast is in the fungus kingdom?
I did not. Yes. And I'm never going to view yeast the same way again.
Yes. I refer to yeast as the engine of fermentation. And with sake, we talk about alcoholic fermentation, but there's other types of fermentation too that we use for baking and things like that. But for sake, we're dealing with alcoholic fermentation, and yeast is a microorganism that eats sugar, consumes sugar, and then as a byproduct of its digestion gives off alcohol and CO2 as byproducts.
No.
And then
It's a very fun microorganism,
Yes.
that you're saying.
And not only alcohol and CO2, but also acids are given off by yeast. And those acids can convert into aroma compounds. So they're hunting for these yeasts that are going to give them the specific attributes that they want when it produces alcohol and acids to influence the flavor and aromas in very specific ways. So that's one of the really unique things about yeast, and it is so integral. The magic of sake is that the interplay of the role that koji plays, breaking down starch into sugar, and then yeast, again, that engine of fermentation that eats the sugar and produces the alcohol. And, this is Kyokai number 77. And that's amazing that over the last decades, they've isolated many approved delicious yeasts to use in sake.
A whole library of them by now.
Yes, there's a whole Rolodex numbered.
Yes. I think it's great. I think that's, I think that adds potential variety to the flavors that sake can have. And when you think about all the other variables that you can include in that, like the rice types, where the rice are grown, the kind of water, or how you're brewing, you can really come up with endless, perhaps 10,000
ways.
Yeah, 10,000 ways to make sake. And I think I love it. I think it's great.
Yeah. The one thing that's going to blow your mind, though, is that some breweries experiment with blending yeasts as well.
Yeah.
It's not the case here with our delicious ripe apple from Kinoene, but some breweries are going to mix two yeasts together when they do that fermentation starter and get an even more complex outcome.
Yeah. I think we definitely have had dual yeast sakes on the show before. I want to say the most intense version of that concept I've ever seen was actually something in Japan. They did not export this from a brewery in Akita they called Royal Flush. And it had like playing cards and everything on it. And it was 5 different rices and 5 different yeasts.
In one sake.
Yes.
Oh my God.
And that was taking that idea and just going as far as you could.
Oh my God.
Because you can. It's really interesting.
Yeah. We've said this before. Like, that is so important, that type of innovation.
Yeah.
Pushing the envelope, trying new yeasts, brewing to a higher acidity, brewing to a higher sweetness, brewing to a higher umami. All these things are so important to expand the palette of what sake can be.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And it redefines what sake could be every time. It's wonderful.
So do you think they achieved what they said, the balance of, let me get this quote right, the balance between sweetness and acidity? Do you think they achieved that with this ripe apple?
Well, you pointed out that it was very acidic. But I pointed out that it was still pretty sweet.
Yeah.
I think
you got your chocolate in my peanut butter.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, the sweetness is there. The acidity is still present. But I mean, it has to be high acidity to counteract that.
Yeah.
To counteract that sweetness.
Well, this is one thing we haven't talked about yet that is important is the finish. Right?
Let's talk about the finish.
The aftertaste. Oh my gosh. This lingers for a long time on your palate, and it makes my mouth water. Like the acidity is so high. It really does get your saliva going like a high acid wine would. And that's not common for sake. Do you feel that as well, John?
I do. I'm a little.
Are you drooling?
No, I'm not drooling, but I'm like, so when you talk, if you have too much liquid in your mouth, that comes out when you're speaking. It changes. It influences your voice a little bit, and so I try to like neutralize whenever possible, and I can tell when my saliva is very thick and all that. And the sake was definitely doing that to me. And I'm sipping water. I'm like seeing what I can do to like neutralize this.
This is an occupational hazard for podcasters, isn't it?
Yeah, apparently it is. It's today I learned that that's an occupational hazard for podcasters. I will take it. I'll accept that. I'll take that burden.
Yeah. But what you said before is so on point that, you know, those dry, clean sakes that I love really cleanse your palate. And it's the sake's job to cleanse your palate. And these higher acid, more viscous sakes need a palate cleanser of some other kind. Mm-hmm. But they just fit a different place in cuisine and pairing, right?
Yeah. And it's a lot of fun to have it like turned on its head. Like,
I am very happy we stumbled on this ripe apple sake. This was a lot of fun.
Yes, definitely. I'm a big fan.
It's cool to see what brewers are doing with like their marketing and their messaging and their styles. I think a lot of thought and a lot of effort went into making this sake, and it's from a great brewery and a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I had a great time getting to talk about it and getting to sip it with you. It's a fun sake, and I like the idea of giving this brewery a little bit of a profile, a little bit of a boost.
All right. Well, John, great to taste with you and such a fun sake to try together. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in again this week. Special hello and thank you to all of our patrons. If you enjoy Sake Revolution and you want to support us too, the best way to do that is to visit patreon.com/sakerevolution and check out our community there. We hope you'll join us.
Another great way to support us is to head over to sakerevolution.com and pick out your favorite t-shirt. We also have stickers. We do sell shirts. We have other items coming soon. I say that a lot, but they are, I promise. And also while you're at the site, please make sure you check out the show notes so you can see the Apple hang tag that we've been talking about. You really don't fully understand what we're talking about with this sake bottle until you see it. And again, a lot of fun drinking this sake. It was good. So on that note, Tim, raise your glass. Remember to keep drinking ripe apple sake. And come
Kampai.